Welcome to Mind Controllers, a podcast about shining the light on the psychological aspects behind some of our favorite video games. I'm your host, Brandon Craw, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Joe Moreno.
Today, we'll be talking about Baldur's Gate 3, and in particular, the character Astarion. So, like all of these talks, I like to start it off by discussing our experience with the game. And I played this game fully through, but where did you stop? You started it, and you started it with your friend, right? With Sam?
With Sam in Texas,
Okay.
yeah. I was like almost a year ago or past a year ago, maybe. We didn't get too far. I think we got into the area where they're trying to sacrifice a little girl, right?
Oh, yeah, that was pretty...
Yeah, it's pretty early in the game. I mean, I was playing an orc, like a martial artist orc. I think his name was Orky. I was just like... It was like midnight, and I was like, I don't got nothing.
Yeah,
I don't got nothing in the tank, man. His name is Orky, and he's a martial artist.
Yeah.
He's like a monk, I think, as the class.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed what I played, and I'm still waiting for the physical edition on PS5.
Is it not out yet?
I don't think the physical edition. I think they announced a while back, but I haven't heard anything about it.
I vaguely remember a September date.
Really?
For the physical. Okay. Yeah. I could be making that up or conflating that with the different game.
I hope it's not September. There's so much stuff coming up. September, October.
I know.
I know. Bad.
What's crazy
in a good way.
Yeah, we're recording this back in July because, and I think this should be out in September because I'm probably going to be out by the time this comes out, and I wanted to, have a research episodes out on when they usually are at the first Friday of every month. But I guess we'll see what life looks like by then. Wait, I don't know, September 6th.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So hopefully that physical edition comes out for you. I played the game fully. I beat it. I took a break somewhere around Act 3 because it felt a little confusing. I haven't touched it since the game first came out, so I don't know if they've patched it, but I just got really lost upon entering Act 3, mostly because there were so many different side quests to do or places to explore, and there really wasn't... I don't remember there being this quest marker or indicator as to where to go to complete the main quest.
Oh, okay.
I knew there was just this general do this thing, stop this guy, fight this person, but I think how you got there was pretty ambiguous and just kind of up to you. I think you could just go guns a-blazing and storm the castle and fight the guy there, but there is a more nuanced way to go about it, and I think I was trying to find that more subtle way.
Did you play with any guides or anything?
I think I looked up... I did, for the most part, no, and that's how I almost entirely skipped over all the side quests of Act 2, because I didn't even realize I was in Act 2, and I ended up just powering through it in a day or so. But I had to look up something for Act 3 when I first entered, because I felt so lost. And when I was trying to get back into the game, because I entered Act 3, put the game down for a month, and then I picked it up again. But that game still left a lasting impact on me. I remember talking to you about this. It might have been in one of our test episodes of Game of the Year 2023, but this game just felt alive to me, and it felt like it responded to everything you're doing. And to be able to create that environment in an RPG video game, very narrative based, to have your decisions matter and change the world around you, really drew me in and made me feel like a part of the lives of some of these characters. And so much so that a lot of these characters' stories just stuck with me, and I still think about them all the time.
Okay.
And kind of compare a lot of the video games I'm playing to that game.
Oh, that's unfair to everything
else. It is very
yeah.
unfair. I think Dragon's Dogma 2 is the biggest offender.
Damn.
I feel so bad. I know I really want to love Dragon's Dogma 2, but I compare it to Elden Ring and then compare it to Baldur's Gate 3. Elden Ring because it kind of somewhat resembles that action gameplay, and then Elden Ring because of the action gameplay. Baldur's Gate 3 for that kind of narrative-based thing. I'm holding both those other games up to too high of a pedestal, I think. I'll give Dragon's Dogma 2 another shot. Yeah, have you played it yet? I know we're not talking about that.
Zenless Zone Zero has been taking up my time whenever I can. I'm at 24 hours on that thing.
Ooh, I'll probably join you there after I finish Undertale.
Okay. I'll see you there.
Yeah. Yeah, because of that, because of how moved I was by these characters, I'm sure we could find another character to do an episode on. But for today, I want to talk about Astarion, who was one of my favorite stories in this game. But before we dive deeper into the story, into the conversation, want to give a spoiler warning for anybody who has not beaten Baldur's Gate 3 and cares about the story. And this is a very narrative heavy game, so it's going to be hard to dance around spoilers here. So give it a spoiler warning. I'm going to be talking about Baldur's Gate 3, all the associated characters, but try to stick to just Astarion there. And like all of our discussions, all these characters are fictional, no intended resemblance to any real person or thing. And we are not licensed therapists. Joe is an associate therapist, but we do not have any authority to make official diagnoses, so these are all just simply 2 informal discussions by grad students. Now that we got that out of the way, let me give a little description about Baldur's Gate 3 for anyone who might be unfamiliar, at least with the narrative of the game. Baldur's Gate 3 is a narrative-driven role-playing video game that has you creating your own character to join a band of unique individuals who have all been stricken with the same conflict. An alien tadpole has been placed in your head, and you now have to figure out how to stop it from turning you into a humanoid squid-looking creature called a mind flayer. So this leads you down many different story paths that all involve stopping or joining a giant sentient brain called the Nether Brain. They have multiple names in there, but Nether Brain is the main one. They can sometimes be known as the Absolute. And the Nether Brain is being controlled by 3 leaders of the Cult of the Absolute. Those leaders' names are Lord Enver Gortash, Ketheric Thorm, and Orin the Red. Each leader has been chosen as a champion for the gods Bane, Myrkul, and Baal, respectively. And throughout the game, you meet many different factions and ideally gather allies as you build towards the final battle against these 3 leaders and eventually the Nether Brain. There's also the option of joining them and joining the Nether Brain, and that creates a whole different story ending. But my focus for this discussion will be on just one of your companions throughout the game, a half-elf vampire named Astarion. He joins up with you after your ship has crash-landed while attempting to escape the clutches of the Mind Flayers. You soon find out that before being captured by the Mind Flayers, Astarion was enslaved by a vampire lord named Cazador Sar. And Astarion is pleasantly surprised by his newfound freedom that was granted to him by the tadpole in his head. So prior to being captured by the Mind Flayers, Astarion was unable to be in sunlight, wade in water, or other kinds of stereotypical hindering vampire behaviors. So because of this, Astarion doesn't necessarily view the parasite as something detrimental to his well-being. But Astarion is also seeking revenge against his previous captor. But the fate of Astarion and how he processes this desire for revenge is ultimately up to you, the player. So now let me talk a little bit about Astarion, tell you a bit about him, maybe a bit about his story. So Astarion's storyline in general stood out to me due to his framing of the tadpole's debilitation and his desire for revenge. So he's like one of the few companions who doesn't really mind having this tadpole placed in their head. Some of the other companions will like be really upset if you do anything to like further the tadpole's like evolution and expanse into your head, into your brain, because that's like a game mechanic later on. You could feed the tadpole and gain mind flayer control powers and stuff, but a lot of them just want to get the tadpole out. But Astarion's like, actually, I'm kind of living a better life now. I don't know if I want this anymore. Sure, I might turn into a mind flayer eventually, but I at least have freedom and agency now. So because of this and some other things I will tell you about, I felt like his story contains some of the highest emotional beats that occur within the game. But I feel like I got to tell you a bit more about this guy and why I appreciated him so much. So let me tell you about his personality. You know, Astarion, he's this charming, witty, and sometimes arrogant individual whose personality brings a lot to the game and this band of characters. So his upbringing as a royal high elf magistrate shaped the majority of his personality and inspired this cunning and eloquent nature that he has. And you could really get that sense when you talk to him. He sounds like he was raised in royalty. So the other part of the Astarion personality we see in Baldur's Gate is influenced by his time as a vampire slave, which now provides him with this vengeance and distrust of pretty much anybody. When you first meet Astarion, he comes across as this overly confident and manipulative, willing to sell himself out to win people over onto his side because he wants to gather these allies in order to have as much power and protection as possible, because he's still fearing his previous vampire captor, Cazador. He doesn't know where he is, doesn't know when he will come back for him. So throughout the game, you have the potential to help Astarion open up and become more empathetic. And Astarion needs someone he can trust and be vulnerable with in order to change, like to become this more empathetic person. So if you choose to do so, you're able to build up your trust and strength of the relationship with Astarion through these correct dialogue choices and skill checks. So the game, has different dialogue options, has like a stat like wisdom or intelligence by it, and you have to roll the die to make sure you succeed that stat check and then therefore like succeed the dialogue option. Otherwise, sometimes if you fail the dialogue check or the skill check, you'll get the character a little upset, or they might do the opposite thing you're asking them or telling them to do. But as your relationship becomes stronger, Astarion begins unraveling his current worldview, which is very destructive, a little nihilist, but also very distrustful. And he starts processing the trauma, which becomes more apparent through his empathetic and less sarcastic dialogue. And you really notice this change later on. If you're trying to butter Astarion up and become closer to him, you notice that change later on in like Act 3. He feels like a totally different person, maybe with like not so many walls and guards up as he did at the start of the game. But if you don't help Astarion process his pain, he becomes an even more narcissistic and power-hungry person. So this healing via dialogue options spans the course of the whole game, which for me was about 90 hours. So, like I said, this is kind of a long process, and it really comes into fruition during this final Act 3 of the game. Let me tell you about Act 3. Let me tell you what happens. I guess before I dive into it, did you meet? Yeah. You met Astarion
pretty early. Yeah.
What was your read on the guy, if you remember?
I mean,
I know it's been a minute.
I liked him.
Okay.
I don't know if we had him in the main party, since it was 2 people, so you only had like 2 other CPUs. I just know the internet went crazy for him. I love him.
Yeah. He was a very seductive, just like enchanting person throughout the game, and I feel like just his character design also. There's something about him. You just
like, I can picture him in my mind right now. Yeah.
I haven't touched the game in a while, but yeah,
I barely played it, so
yeah,
they did something right with Astarion.
Mm-hmm. He was a very popular character. So let me tell you about his Act 3, either revenge and power or healing. So eventually, I'm sorry, I'm about to spoil this for you, Joe. I know you haven't played it yet.
Don't worry, I'll forget it whenever I get to it again.
Eventually, Astarion's story leads him to the previous captor, Cazador Azar, in his palace, which just happens to be in Baldur's Gate by the time you get, which is where Act 3 takes place. It's in Baldur's Gate. So this starts a large and probably one of the more interesting fights in the game, where you have these multiple people who are held captive, including Astarion, in this like kind of floating arena. I mean, it's attached by a very thin bridge, but it looks like this giant circular arena with a pit right behind it. So you have to fight in the circle. And if you think of it as the circle as like a clock, I think there's like maybe 6 or 7 coffins spread out along. So like maybe every other number on a clock, like 12, then 2, then 4, whatever. And I think you have these runes and like this path that you can tell is draining the energy from the captors and funnels it into this one coffin in the center, which is Cazador's. So Cazador is in the center, draining the hostages of their life. And he's trying to complete this ritual to ascend, as the title is Vampire Ascendant or an Overlord. And because of like all the different choices like built into this game, there are some different outcomes that are possible for Astarion's storyline. But I think the 2 most pertinent ones to this conversation are successfully beating Cazador and then deciding what Astarion does after that. So you could either decide for Astarion to continue to be what is called like a vampire spawn. So not necessarily the lowest ranking. He's like a bit more esteemed and like a bit more revered, because he was like a chosen one to be sacrificed to help this ascendants. But there are some other people who are just turned into like these, I don't even know what to call them, like vampire minions. Like they don't really have agency, they can't think, and they're just like captured. So Astarion's like one step above that. And you could either, after beating Cazador, decide to continue to be this vampire spawn and live the way he currently is living. Or Astarion can become the vampire overlord, replacing Cazador and completing the ritual, and achieving this title of Vampire Ascendant. So after you defeat Cazador, You have this conversation with Astarion where you help him decide what choice he wants to make. And you can tell Astarion's nobility and desperation for power, mostly rightfully due to his enslavement and lack of control over his life, because this was centuries that he was living like this, causes him initially to want to overtake the ritual and become the vampire ascendant. So he rationalizes this decision by claiming that with this newfound power, he can now use it to defeat the cult of the Absolute in the Nether Brain. But to do this would mean like sacrificing thousands of the vampire minions who you could otherwise set free, and sacrificing some of these other vampire spawn, which is the same rank as so that the other people who are in that circle, who are in the coffins, who are being drained of life, pretty much kill everybody, become the most powerful vampire. It was what Astarion was kind of leaning towards. So you have to kind of determine, whether you want to support this. I wanted to convince him it was a bad idea. So, but what is interesting are some of the dialogue choices in order to convince him that this is an evil option. One of them, which requires a persuasion roll, talks about how Astarion won't be proud of this decision. So you're kind of like guilting him. You're like, hey, don't take this. I don't think you're going to be, you might want this power in the moment, but you're not going to feel good about this afterwards. So taking the moral high ground here and convincing Astarion to forego his desire for power causes him to realize that this is Astarion's opportunity to be better than his captor, Cazador. But his somewhat sadistic nature does not prevent him from enjoying stabbing Cazador over and over again. Even as he collapses, he does not stop. And he is just... Have you seen this cutscene in any capacity?
No,
he's just going to town on him. Everyone is just like, because Cazador is defeated, he's just on the ground, but Astarion is just constantly stabbing him. There's blood flying everywhere. No one's stopping him. And it feels like he's letting these decades of pent-up rage towards his capture, he's just letting it all go with every thrust of that knife. And finally, as he stops stabbing him, he's just staring at his lifeless body. But you could tell that Astarion is still seething. He still is holding on to that anger. He's breathing. He's angry. But then he collapses and falls to his knees. And you see that anger turn into like sadness and maybe release.
Okay.
Because he begins crying. It's like he's releasing all this anger, frustration, his disgust, maybe a bit of guilt as well, as he realizes he finally achieved this revenge he has waited his whole life for. This felt like, I don't know, just seeing this flood of emotion go from this hatred to now this release felt so powerful to me. I don't know, it felt like I was watching someone's very intimate moment of their life, and the developers did such a good job capturing that into this game and expressing it through the emotions of this one character. It still sticks with me. I still see his blood-covered face in my head right now and just like see him sobbing and crying. And I remember when I first played that scene and watched it, I just felt that I felt like a tension inside me as well as I witnessed it. It was incredible.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like, what's behind all that anger? It was sadness, right? There was so much pent up, anger, but there was also a lot of sadness, right? Because he immediately, realizes what he does, right? And now he's sobbing, right? He's like, well, I wonder if he's thinking, what was this all for?
Yeah.
Because Cazador is gone, right? He's dead.
He's dedicated probably at this point the majority of his life to hating this guy.
And you lose that sense of purpose because Cazador is gone, right? So it's like, whoa, what happens after?
Yeah. He had to find a new purpose right then and there. There were some other like things at stake I didn't describe too. There was also like the town was, I don't know if this goes for everyone or I just somehow stumbled upon it through the dialogue choices, but the town was also staging like a witch hunt for Cazador.
Oh, okay.
But they didn't, of course they didn't come in time. So I actually did a little save scum and I wanted to see what happens if I let him take the power choice. And as soon as he like becomes the ascendant, the town comes in and they're like, God damn it. we were here to stop this, but now we see there's just another one of you instead. There's just another vampire ascendant instead. So then you have to fight the town.
Oh, okay.
Right after. there's like no opportunity for a rest or anything like that. So I felt like that was a pretty hard fight already. So it felt like you're just gonna lose, and I wasn't feeling great about the decision. And I was mostly just curious. I wanted him not to take it anyway. So then I'm like, okay, let me just reload the save here. I don't want to fight the town right now and all of that. But so it was interesting. Like he had this pressure to make this decision, and of course you as the player help him come to a decision, but it was a lot of different stuff going on.
I'm curious to see what happens after you fight the town.
Yeah.
And win. Right.
Yeah. Win. Yeah, I know.
Huh.
The town was upset that Cazador was turning a lot of their loved ones into that vampire minion, that lowest level, and then capturing them in this jail. And so that's why they wanted to go and hunt him down. But then you talk to him first. They're like, no, let me go and hunt him down, and then I'll come up for you guys. So, but yeah, I don't know. I'm sure they built that into the game.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like knowing them, they thought of every single scenario. I'm curious too. Anyways, back to Astarion and being good. We then see the other members of this ritual, like I said, who are of similar status to Astarion, so above this minion or feed level. They become free of their magic bindings, and they approach Astarion. And just like you said, they don't, like Astarion lost a sense of purpose. They were also like asking you, what do we do with our lives now? Like, what do we do after this? Like, this was our life. So Astarion responds that they can either continue hiding like parasites, or they can be more than what he made us to be. And this line stood out to me. It told me that Astarion viewed his current life as someone who was leeching off of whatever they could find, grasping for power and resources without ever really getting ahead. And now, as someone who was born from nobility, Astarion does not recognize that part of himself anymore. He's so far removed from his noble life that he seems to have forgotten about it. So it kind of tore me apart to see someone feel like they've been nearly nothing their whole life, and now they feel like they can move on. They've gotten this closure, but they're still reaching for that purpose. So they still feel confused. I'm like, I can't imagine being enslaved for centuries and just what that could do to someone's psyche. Right. I would be happy to get that mind flayer tadpole inside my head too if all of a sudden that meant freedom after centuries. Yeah, like I said about the feed hostages, you can actually, no, I didn't say this yet. You can decide to release them because they are trapped in the cell that's nearby, or you could kill them as sort of a mercy killing because Astarion says that they aren't really human anymore, but I'm not 100% sure why.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I guess they just didn't retain their agency and their sense of self after they returned into the feed, apparently. I don't know though, but I did feel a little bit bad about them, so I did free them, and I didn't notice any negative detrimental things happening in the world because I freed them. I didn't notice more vampires I had to fight or anything like that, but maybe there was some sort of dialogue thing, or maybe some sort of narrative side quest in which this becomes a problem for releasing hundreds of vampires into the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe in hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I shouldn't have released hundreds of vampires into this
They're all
world.
good. Everyone's fine, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I stopped. I saved the nether brain. So, I stopped the nether brain. So maybe one good deed outweighed the bad one. So you can also talk to Astarion again after this moment, and he quickly reflects on how, after centuries, this burden has been lifted from him. You can tell him you're proud of him, but Astarion says he does not know how to feel, and he just feels numb. We go back to him. He's now searching for a purpose. His life has just been flipped upside down. And, this stood out. Astarion wanted nothing more than revenge his whole life. So I thought, maybe he would be relieved that at last he got this revenge he's been looking for. But no, he was still processing everything. He was still even unsure that he made the correct decision to do this. I think he feels a little bit guilty about this. But, Astarion's story seems somewhat relatable to some aspects of life, especially those where we felt like we've been wronged and we want to get revenge in some way. I'm sure we all have some sort of, obviously not to the extent of revenge that Astarion was seeking. I've never been held hostage. There's never really been anybody I was trying to kill because of revenge, but there's certainly times when I felt wrong. So seeing what happens to Astarion here, kind of made me question if revenge is really a good thing. It's really what people want. and if it's really going to help us feel better. So this was me thinking that a lot of the time it's probably better to process and figure out why we want this revenge in the first place. What emotions or needs were not met that caused us to feel this way? And what happened to make us feel wronged and powerless? These were just some off-the-cuff questions to help get behind that meaning of revenge, or that feeling of revenge, and the meaning behind it, and why we're feeling this way, and why we felt we were wronged, and what, I don't know, I guess, what do we need in order to heal from that experience? So have you ever felt like you needed to seek some murderous revenge like Astarion?
In LA traffic, yeah.
Oh, man. If you're cut off in the wrong way, huh?
Through a long trek back from Vegas, yes.
Oh, shit. Yeah, I bet. I thought you were going to say when they weren't about to let you back in that... into the
Evo?
Yeah.
No, there was no murderous revenge. It was just like, I was in there. Get me back in there, please.
Yeah.
We have some articles about revenge. Right.
Ain't none of us going to talk about it. So revenge was a big part of Astarion's storyline, a big part of what stood out to me. So I wanted to do a little more diving into some articles, some psychology articles about revenge. So, try to look for some current research that was done. So one literature review analyzed some reasonings behind revenge. And they found a couple of theories. One biological theory believed that revenge is hardwired into humanity early on in our evolutionary history. And I think that was more because it kind of ties into the second one. Another theory, this is a cultural model, and it believes that revenge was a later evolutionary trait that became useful for societies. And this cultural model states that social norms are internalized. And when someone violates one of these cultural norms, a body of people or an individual might feel personally attacked and will seek revenge against the person violating the norms. And I think for biological theory, that was probably resources. If somebody wronged you and you lost resources, then you would seek revenge to prevent yourself from losing resources further. They found that revenge through the cultural model, it's not really for the individual, but more for the homeostasis of the group. So to make sure the group is still functioning as a whole. They will seek revenge to make sure those social norms aren't violated and the group can continue living on the way they decided to live. So I love this title. One revenge researcher named Gintis in 2013 stated that individuals seek revenge not when they have been hurt, but when they have been morally wronged. And this quote felt pretty pertinent because in combination with the cultural model for revenge, it brings morals and I would say further down the road, pride into the mix of seeking revenge. Because I could see a scenario in which one's morals are tied into the sense of self. And maybe someone who is overly prideful has this very strong sense of self. So if their morals are violated, their sense of self might feel violated and they feel more personally attacked and therefore wanting to seek revenge.
Okay.
So at the very basic level, I could see how this is somewhat similar to what happened to Astarion, but of course that's ignoring a lot of the trauma and abuse that he had to endure for centuries. But I could see the cultural model at least somewhat applying to Astarion here. Anyways, the literature review continues talking about the types of people who would seek revenge. There's certain personality types that are more likely to seek revenge. And
you don't say.
Yeah, right. And those are people with higher scores of neuroticism and narcissism typically had higher levels of anger and thus were more likely to seek revenge. So narcissists were more likely to endorse revenge after being socially rejected because they felt they did not receive the respect they deserved. And they also felt they deserved special treatment.
Wow.
So if they didn't get that treatment and if they didn't get the respect that they felt like deserved, and of course respect is subjective, then they were likely to seek revenge, which is kind of crazy. We then examine how does revenge occur and what does that even look like? Because revenge isn't just murdering people. There's some...
It's not just murder. It's more.
It's greater. No, there's some other social ways one can seek revenge. So this literature review suggested that revenge can be either covert and include gossiping and giving negative evaluations, hiding knowledge, or ignoring the offender.
Okay.
So some social ways to...
Gotcha. I thought we were throwing lawsuits at people.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure that falls under...
Oh, yeah.
I am sure, especially with how, sue trigger happy some people are, and certain states that
shall not be
kind of
named.
promote that kind of thing. No, that's certainly a way to seek revenge. Another type of revenge, called displaced revenge, occurs when an individual retaliates against someone by harming a larger group that they're a part of, such as harming a company due to a transgression that might have been made by a single employee. I think like this can occur with like leaving a bad Yelp review or something like that these days. You know, if like an individual employee, I don't know, felt like they wronged you in some way, you write that review, and in general, it kind of hurts that company or hurts that business or that restaurant or whatever. Vicarious revenge occurs when an avenger attacks a larger group that is associated with the avenged group. The example that they listed for this is such as like a domestic terrorist attack. I also was curious, well, what do we do if you feel vengeful? Like, okay, you have this desire to get back at the person. How do we get rid of that?
Yeah, bit of a fighting game.
Yeah. That's one way to do it. That's like it's displaced revenge. Now, well, one healthy way to do it is to seek out forgiveness, which might not be the answer you're looking for.
Yeah, that's such a cop-out, right?
Yeah, I know. But one article, you know, they suggested forgiveness. They stated that when someone is victimized, it could lead to this feeling of dehumanization. So, you know, you feel like you're not part of humanity. You feel like a part of you or is like no longer a part of the group, or you feel like you were singled out in some way. And that can lead to these feelings of, like I said, dehumanization. So they suggest forgiveness against the transgressor helps rehumanize the self, which then can further lead to less self-harm, less harm in general, and then reintegrate that sense of belonging into the community, and also can reinforce your own moral identity if you choose to forgive somebody. Weirdly enough, though, there weren't a lot of articles about how to mitigate revenge. Even forgiveness in general, I found, ironically enough, we're locked behind so many different paywalls.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. There were a lot of articles that promoted forgiveness towards a transgressor as like the way to improve your subjective well-being when you're feeling vengeful, but couldn't read them, couldn't find them anywhere else online. It felt like compared to some other things or like some other articles that we've been looking for, this in particular, I couldn't find anything that wasn't like paywalled already. And their abstract didn't really help much. So I'm like, oh,
that's wild.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I guess what society's trying to tell you is to just go seek out that revenge. No, please don't. I did not condone this. This is not, I'm not giving life advice here. Don't do that. I'm sure it is very hard and could require therapy to seek out that forgiveness, but that is ultimately the more healthy, beneficial way in the long run. If you ever feel like you've been wronged. And I mean, I'll be transparent. I feel like the times where I felt like I've been wronged, I don't know if I have forgiven those people. Like, I don't know if I can even look at them and think about them in a forgiveness light.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So like, it's hard for me too. So I know I'm saying this, but it's not easy.
Yeah. I'd agree with you. Yeah.
How do you feel about Astarion now after learning about his whole life here?
He's a cool dude. Too bad about the trauma and the torture. And again, internet loves him, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's like everyone's hot vampire boyfriend. So.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
I know. Yeah. I've fallen in love with him too in my own way here, just reading about him. I know this isn't the proper use of the term trauma bonding, but it feels a bit.
But it's you know what's the studio?
Larian Studios.
They did a really good job on just like fleshing out the characters. Right? If this is just one character, right? If we did like case studies for everyone, like
everyone in the main crew.
That's a lot of time and work, and I'm personal experience as well, right? I mean, no one's been enslaved for centuries, right? But like that feeling of wanting to get that revenge, that's like a natural human emotion, right? And it's something like when you were talking about it, I can feel it as well. I can, understand where you're coming from with Astarion now, and then the cop out of just forgive.
I know.
Man.
I was really searching for something other than that, but in addition to not finding good articles, unlocked articles, all of the research on revenge, not a lot of them had any details on what to do to not feel vengeful. They just didn't touch on it. They were talking a lot about what I talked about with the psychology, the evolutionary reasons behind it, the personality traits and types of revenge, but never like how to prevent it from even getting there in the first place and
right?
processing.
Or even, mitigate it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So anyone out there listening who's doing some sort of psych research, behavioral research, this could be an interesting avenue that could, I think benefit a lot of people, since, I don't know, a lot of people feel wronged on the daily and some people take it a little too far.
Yeah.
I think that summarizes my boy Astarion. I hope I didn't paint him in the wrong picture. He's a lot more than stabbing vampires. He's got a lot to offer. I would love to do another episode on some of these other characters too. I feel like Astarion's like I said, stood out to me the most, but there's some other characters there who have equally interesting and a lot of psychology stuff behind it that I think we could do a deep dive into. But yeah, Joe, you ready to go seek some revenge right now, or is it just me?
Yeah, let's go do it. Yeah,
yeah, he's about to beat my ass in Street Fighter 6 or something right now, but cool. Well, y'all, this is probably the first shorter episode we're going to do where we focused more on, well, I say first shorter because we just talked like an hour and a half recording our previous episode on fighting games. But yeah, thank you all for listening. Be sure to follow us on socials, Instagram, Twitch. I have a Twitter. We have a Twitter, but I don't really post too much on it. But maybe we could use that to unlock some freebies in the future.
Maybe.
But yeah, and also if anybody has any recommendations or questions about anything, or they just want to chat, do not be shy about hitting us up on Instagram or shooting us an email or anything. Always happy to talk. Yeah, I appreciate you all. I hope you guys take care of yourselves. Try to let go of that revenge. I know it's hard. I feel the same, but yeah. Take care, everybody.
See you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.